Welcome to Marcor Studios, where here we will be interviewing different industry professionals and educating our homeowners as well as the industry as a whole. Hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to Marcor Studios. Thank you to our listeners. We're here to support our industry from homeowners to builders, developers, and anybody within the trade. Today we have with us Dean from DocuTrax. Dean, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You came all the way from Florida for us today, so thank you.
Yes, and for good weather too.
Yeah, we lucked out. Thank you for bringing that to us. So DocuTrax. What is it? Can you tell us a little bit about what you guys do over there?
So DocuTrax is a company that I formed being an insurance industry veteran that tracks third-party relationships to basically verify that they have valid and collectible insurance. So it's a verification company, technology. We use licensed professionals as well as our own custom technology to track and to sort and to perform all kinds of procedures. It's a company that what we do is more of what is not being done in the industry, which is really looking at contracts, leases, agreements, looking at situations where you have contractual relationships like subcontractors of contractors, general contractors, to make sure the subcontractors have valid and collectible insurance, that the policies they're writing adhere to or at least coincide to what they have said they're doing. So certain trade contractors that are advertising that they're doing certain things to make sure the insurance policies are valid and collectible per their work.
So basically, like I know in our conversations, you're working with DASNY, you're doing their third-party verifications. So you're not in the business, you used to be in the business of selling insurance, but now you're in the business of verifying that the insurance that's being sold is the right insurance for what's being done.
Exactly.
So basically, what are the type of loopholes you're seeing? What are people not carrying, or where are people getting exposed?
Well, you might have a roofing contractor that has a height exclusion on their policy, and
all day
they probably might not know it, but for sure their subcontractors or they're the homeowners or they're the commercial establishments that are using them wouldn't know it because the certificate of insurance doesn't tell you about the exclusions that are in the policy. So you have to actually physically see the policy, read the policy, and actually know what the policy says, which is literally impossible for the average person or consumer.
Yeah.
So what we'll do is we'll go in and we will look at the policy to verify that what the contractor says they have insurance for, they actually do.
So a lot of the times these contractors don't even know they don't have the right insurance. They're paying a bunch of money for an insurance policy that's really just a piece of paper.
Right.
And there's not really a whole lot of coverage.
Right.
Because how often do you see that?
See it often because the industry is now challenged with the professional work that their agent should be doing that might not be doing. So it's something that is getting to be more and more of a problem for the industry, where it's becoming more of a transactional business rather than a professional service. Years and years ago, you had an agent would sit, read contracts, read leases, read third parties' insurance policies to make sure to validate that their client is being protected properly. These days, that's happening few and far between.
Yeah. I mean, for us, we self-perform a lot of our work, but let's say we outsource gutters and a guy were to, get injured on the site from the gutter company. We always send stuff, whether it's to you or to our own insurance broker. Not everybody's as lucky to have insurance brokers that really understand what they're reading. Right. So, but I was introduced to you from your company, from another company that we were doing work because their insurance company hired you to do the third-party verifications. And they wanted to make sure that they weren't going to have to pay out the claim if it was an upstream claim. So they hired me. They wanted to make sure that the buck stopped there, that I had the proper coverage to tender back to.
Exactly.
And that's something that, we're seeing as obviously a big issue in the industry. But when you have these gaps in insurance, how do you see this affecting the homeowners in these situations?
Well, multiple ways. One is someone gets injured on the site and they don't have proper insurance, so they can sue the homeowners. Secondly, if someone does work for a homeowner and their work is defective and the house burns down or someone falls down, to tender a claim against the contractor they thought that had insurance or proper insurance, to find out they didn't, that becomes a big problem.
You may bring up a good point of things that they're not covered in. So something that we run into a lot of the time in the roofing industry is torch applied roofing. Right. So torch applied roofing, obviously you're using a torch to heat up the seams. A majority of the residential roofing contractors have exclusions for it.
Yep.
Except the second I cross out in the out east, out east in Long Island, all of these GCs and all of these contractors are offering torch applied roofing. Except it's not only is it illegal on wood frame buildings, but you're also facing the situation where we were looking at a policy earlier today that we said, you had said there was a torch applied exclusion. If they use a torch, there's an exclusion. Can you elaborate? What does that actually mean for either the homeowner that hired them or the general contractor that hired the roofer? What would that mean if that exclusion took place and they used a torch and burnt that house down because of the torch?
They couldn't tender a claim against the contractor. They'd have no insurance for that actual action.
So then it would end up falling on, let's say, the homeowner.
Right. So the homeowner's policy would have to pay for it. Ultimately, there might be deductible issues. There might be an issue where what's going to happen and maybe they don't have enough coverage. Yeah. So when you're relying on the third party to protect you in the event that they do something wrong and they have proper insurance and you find out they didn't, because one, most people don't actually go that deep because of the fact that you have a certificate of insurance. And in most cases, homeowners don't even ask for that. But if they did, that's not going to tell them that that exclusion exists.
Correct.
And ultimately, the only way you'd find that out is if a professional, which we have licensed insurance professionals that are certified in the construction industry to look at things like that policy and be able to identify the difference between the right insurance and the wrong insurance.
So one thing that I find very frustrating in this industry is that people say, oh, well, not all of us are as big as Marcor, and while we're a decent sized company, we're not one of the largest out here. We have a nice setup, a nice infrastructure, but no matter how big or small the company is, I find it very frustrating when people say, oh, well, not everybody can comply like you do. Not everybody can have the insurances that you do. Can you elaborate on a little more of the reality is it doesn't matter how big or how small we are. Right. At the end of the day, the exposure is there.
Exposure is there. And if a contractor comes in and it's a person that has a small company and they do something wrong and you think they have insurance and they don't, or if they get injured on the job and it falls on you, it's a problem. So it's really not big or small. It's the fact that you are hiring somebody contractually and you want to make sure that they have proper insurance, not only to protect you, but to protect them so it doesn't fall back on you.
Now, is this a service that you offer? Is this something that if a homeowner were going to be doing, let's say they wanted to be their own general contractor on a project and they wanted to manage their own site, or let's say somebody was flipping a house, can they come to you guys directly and hire you to review everyone's insurance policy since now they are the one contracting? Can a traditional homeowner come to you and pay a fee?
A homeowner could do that.
Okay.
Basically, they would want to make sure and validate that their third-party relationships are properly covered. They could do that.
Okay.
Whether they would do it or not, because most homeowners don't realize that this is a problem until it's... So the interesting thing about the insurance industry is you don't know the defects that exist in the policy until it's too late.
Yeah, unfortunately.
So a company buys an insurance policy. They have a broker who advises them that I'm giving you this policy, and maybe they're not really identifying the traps in that policy. The contractor pays for the insurance. One day there's the loss and they find out they had an exclusion. Well, it's too late. The loss happened. You're not covered. That whole thing becomes a mess. And it's not like you manufactured a car and you see there's a defect. When there's a defect in the insurance policy, when you realize it, it's too late. So
Unfortunately, or unless somebody hires somebody like you guys proactively, which doesn't unfortunately happen often.
Unless we do. And we get hired not only by contractors, but by real estate companies that make their tenants have proper insurance.
Yeah.
Major companies like Verizon who basically have, third-party relationships. So it could be, banking institutions that want to make sure that their people that they're lending money to have proper insurance to protect their interests. So it really covers in most any industry. The construction industry is tricky, and especially in New York because your labor laws are very difficult, and insurance companies don't willingly write construction in New York, so it's a more difficult buy for a contractor.
So it's interesting you bring that up because New York is, this complicated state for us to work in with the scaffold law and the labor law. Before we got in, to talk about this, I had just checked an email of, I guess, a majority of our work we self-perform, but every year people are up for renewal. So we ended up having one guy that we do sub work to, and he changed his carrier. Right. And I had flipped it to my broker and said, hey, can you review this? And he kicked it back to me and he said, well, just by seeing the name of the company, he said, I know that there's a hard hammer here. And that means technically, we could talk all day, hard hammer, soft hammer, but on the hard hammer that he had basically said that he could not subcontract work. Otherwise, coverage wouldn't apply. Right. So if something were to happen, it would have got kicked back to me. So in that case, when I flip something like that to you, again, not everybody is fortunate enough to have a broker that knows what they're looking at and writes this stuff all day. Speaking to more of, our listeners that come from the builder and the general contractor background, how's what your services, what you offer? How's that something that can help you? I know we've talked between builder developers and GCs being able to, reviewing their policies. You also have the municipality and the town side that this third-party verification actually helps them too. Can you elaborate on how that would help?
Well, if a governmental entity licensed, their contractors and they verify that they have insurance, they don't know whether the insurance is proper or not because unless someone's going in there and doing what we're doing is, reviewing the policies of the contractors to make sure that they are actually insuring what
the trade is that they do.
The trades that they're actually doing, and there's no exclusions for things like height exclusion, et cetera. They wouldn't know. So the consumer wouldn't know. The homeowner would look and say, oh, this is a contractor that has insurance. And maybe they don't have proper insurance. And so it's really a problem that exists for everybody because unfortunately in tricky industries where insurance is tough to get, there's exclusions. That particular company decided that, we're not getting the right information from our professional representation to show that the third-party relationships have proper insurance. So we're not going to pick up the exposure of subcontractors. So you're on your own when it comes to that. So there's ways that the insurance industry can get around claims they don't want to pay because of exclusions or endorsements that they put into policies. And sometimes agents or brokers might not disclose that to their client, or maybe they didn't read the form correctly. An insurance policy is a contract. It's a promise to pay something when it happens. It's a legal agreement that says this is what we're going to pay for and this is what we're not going to pay for. It's the professional advisor's point to make sure that it's saying what you need it to say to protect your client. And if that's not being done by the contractor's vendor, which is their broker, they would never know that.
So how often when you guys are reviewing these policies, are you seeing issues? Are you seeing, and what kind of things are you seeing excluded? Is it, a exclusion to bodily injury, height restrictions? I mean, we know.
All the above, yeah. So, and how often? A greater percentage than we would expect. So there's a good deal of times when we're reading policies where the actual policy holder, the contractor, doesn't realize that they're not properly covered. And then
scary.
It's very scary because they say, well, I'm paying for something. And then, how did I know that my subcontractors weren't covered? or I wasn't going to be covered for doing work with subcontractors, or I couldn't tender a claim against them.
Yeah.
It's a problem. It's a real problem.
And now you guys deal with, as we mentioned earlier, like DASNY. Like, what are the reasons why some of these governmental agencies, like something like DASNY, which is the Dormitory Authority of New York, why would they want to bring you in? Is that
this validate that the people that are out there, doing construction work or doing work, or have proper and valid and collectible insurance? They want to make sure that they're representing that their people that are doing business in their world are properly insured.
Okay.
And it's just due diligence. It's like, you wouldn't sign an agreement without having an attorney look at it. And
we'd hope.
Well, that people do, and shame on them. But if you're buying a building or you're buying a business, you have attorneys review that. You're getting their professional advice, and you want to make sure it's correct. So that's really, at a lesser degree, it's really what we do.
So the reality is that the business you're in shouldn't have to exist if people just did their jobs.
Again, so I'll give you an example. Insurance agents have license to sell insurance to whoever they want.
Yeah.
Now, the insurance world is becoming very specialized. So if I'm an insurance person that specializes in real estate or transportation, and I write a construction company, I might not know what I should or shouldn't do to write the policy properly. I might think I know. So you're at the mercy of the fact that the professional advisor, who you think your insurance agency would know all these industries, they might not know that. And they might not have the expertise to understand the difference between what's correct and not correct. So that's another problem. And how would the consumer know that my insurance broker, my professional advisor, doesn't understand my industry?
It's scary, but the reality, we see it all day and every day, that this is something that, people want to write the policies, but they're not understanding, and then you think you hired a professional.
Right.
I mean, I had actually flipped my policy to you guys a while back to demonstrate something of trying to show what a good policy looked like versus a bad one. And we even saw that, while we pay a hefty number for insurance, that there were some wires crossed and that we need to do some cleaning up on our end.
Right.
And here I was paying premiums, knowing all of this stuff, expecting my broker at the time knew what he was looking at and was guiding me properly, only to find out after the fact that if something were to happen with, company A versus company B, I had wires crossed and there was a coverage potential exposure. And that's what's such a scary thing. We talk all the time to different people, different roofing contractors. And again, that conversation always comes up. Well, it's not everybody's as big as you. That's, and that's something that really is something that the perception needs to change in the industry, because somebody can be doing $500,000 in sales, and, if they're subcontracting work, or if they're self-performing and they're, and they have employees and there's an exclusion to bodily injury and they're working for a general contractor. I mean, unfortunately, a lot of these general contractors, builders, and developers, unless they have somebody like yourselves or somebody that's doing these insurance reviews, they don't even know that they're exposing themselves. Right. They don't know what to look for a lot of the time. They're very good with finding land. They're very good with financing land and making sure that there's building, consultants involved in these projects, but do they know what they're exposing themselves to? Or sometimes are they willing to roll the dice because the costs are so excessive? Right.
Severe incidents, accidents, claims are not just with big companies. The small guy can cause major damage, and same way that the large contractors. So it's really a question that you're dealing in a legal world, you're dealing where there could be potentially any kind of danger. And at the end of the day, if you have someone who's proposing a policy that you really don't understand all the terms and conditions, you're relying on their expertise. They might not have it. I mean, I can tell you that there are specialists. When I was in the insurance industry, I was more specialized in hospitality. I knew hospitality better than anybody, but I didn't know other classes of business. So you really need to really focus a little more on who you're doing business with, what they're actually doing, and are they doing the right job, and making sure you're verifying that that's correct, because it's not, as I said, something that you can, it's not a tangible product where you can feel it and say, this doesn't feel right, or this doesn't look right, or
you won't know, like you said, until it's too late, unfortunately.
This doesn't feel like a 2-pound item. It feels like it's 3 ounces, but in the insurance contract, you wouldn't know that till you get the claim denied by an insurance company, because based on their terms and conditions, they had the right to do that if they had exclusions.
I mean, listen, you said it's a contract. So at the end of the day, when we sign our binder and you make a deposit and you're paying premiums, you're paying for that insurance policy. You want to know that if there's an accident or if something were to happen, that you're going to be able to have coverage for that and they're going to step in. Last question is, would you say that it would be a smart idea before anyone in the industry were to bind an insurance policy that perhaps they use a service like yours proactively to double check that what their contract, what their broker is telling them is actually the coverage they're getting?
Well, that's a good question. Most people wouldn't do that. They would rely on their broker. I would, say if you're doing business with someone that's a professional, to make sure that they understand your profession well enough, you've documented what you are asking them to do, and make sure that they verify what you've asked them to do, they actually did. Now, if you have a professional expert that understands the construction industry and writes an inferior product, well, that's a problem. But
unfortunately, a problem that happens often.
Yeah. So, but that's the buyer beware. But how about the poor third party relationship that doesn't know you bought an inferior product until it's too late? That's what we're trying to protect.
Correct. Now, if anybody did want to reach you to be able to learn more about what your company does or be able to utilize your services, what's the best way for them to reach you?
Well, they can contact us at our website, DocuTrax.com.
Okay, beautiful.
And there's a place for them to put their information in. We'll have one of our professionals get in touch with them and see what we can do to help them.
Beautiful. And we'll add at the bottom of this, if anyone wants to be able to click on your website, we'll make sure that they have access to that logo.
Okay, you got it.
All right. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for everything.